Hello, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable discussion on ethics and etiquette for collaborative projects. Today we have Esmail Khalaf and Tom Tobin, who are both applications experts, and Jim Stoneberger, who is a solutions consultant. I am Marie Williams-Bell, and I am also an applications expert, and we are all with IMAGINiT Technologies Building Solutions Division. So our conversation today is going to be centered around just ethics and etiquette for collaborative design, all of which are topics that we're going to address in something called a BIM execution plan. So as we talk about this, we'll kind of talk about how these might apply in the BIM execution plan and what kind of problems it can possibly mitigate. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about like what is a BIM execution plan. So Jim, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So BIM execution plan at a very high level is really a document that's put together that gives you the entire project team sort of an understanding of what the project is going to be, how we're going to exchange information, what LOD we're developing model content to, even as far as what project teams look like, naming conventions, just kind of everything about the project. The BIM execution plan really gives you a go-to for how are we performing this project throughout the entire BIM process, or even really design and production process of a project. So there's a lot that can be built into a BIM execution plan. It's really there certainly is a standard format for the BIM execution plan out there. And there is a lot that you can pull from in terms of what is this, what does it look like, where does it live? But at the end of the day, it really is kind of a customized document that's customized for two reasons. One, for the firm or the company you're working at. Maybe you have a certain set of guidelines or standards that you want to adhere to. You're going to put into that BIM execution plan things that are important to you. But then two, it's going to obviously get adjusted per project. And some of that information is going to change or not change or even get removed, or sometimes information added to it based on the project that you're doing. So again, when we talk about etiquette and ethics, as Marie said, everything that we're going to go through in this session and talk about really can be addressed and communicated via that BIM execution plan. And the content that's in that plan really kind of addresses all of those, especially the etiquette, factors of how are we conducting the project. So,
yeah, BIM execution plans are extremely important on any project. When you think about how much information is actually being exchanged back and forth between all of the different entities, it's really important to kind of define like how is that information going to be exchanged, how often does it need to be exchanged, like anything that comes down to the exchange of information, which is why it's important to bring as many people as you can into the BIM execution meeting as far as the different entities involved on the project. BIM is the process of building the model. It's not the software. So even if there's someone who's not using Revit on a project, it's important to include them in the BIM execution plan meeting, take them into consideration in the BIM execution plan itself. There should be workflows involved that help you collaborate with all entities on a project.
Yeah, one thing, Marie, is bringing all parties of the project together. But it's very critical of doing it very early on in the project too. Having everybody in there, getting those agreements in place, and helping with the execution of the project for sure. Yeah.
So Esma, with that, I guess, who do you think should be involved in even developing that BIM execution plan?
Typically the industry goes around with the architect or the prime consultant working on it, and it really depends also if I want to even think about it from a different perspective. It all depends on the type of contract that a project is basically moving ahead with. If it's a build or bid or design bid build, or if it's a the other types of contracts that I really can't think of right now. It really depends on that. And typically, the prime consultant, the architect, will take the first stab at it, share it with the MEP engineers, the structural folks, and any other sub parties that might be involved. That's typically how it's done on the design side, and not only sharing the information, but
Provide-
having that initial conversations and getting everybody on the same board.
Yeah, just so everyone understands, like even down to like which software version you're using.
Definitely.
Like it can be as tiny details like that all the way out to like what type of PDF are we delivering for the final deliverable and to who and what's their email address even. So what kind of topics do you guys like to include in your BIM execution plans? One of them for me is always the software version. Are we going to be updating the software at some point? Is everyone going to be installing the hot fixes? Maybe there's plugins that we all need to use.
Yeah, those are definitely important ones. I mean, we definitely have to be on the same page as far as the software versioning. The question comes to when do we upgrade and what is holding others back from using what version. So part of that execution plan, of course, is 100% communication and making sure that everyone is on the exact same page when we go through that. So if we have half of the team that's deciding to stay on 20 and the other half is deciding to go to 2021, we could run into some real coordination issues there because Revit, as we know, dealing with them is not backwards compatible. So
yeah, definitely. And it's important to take into consideration like which version is going to work best for the majority of the team. So as you guys have probably noticed by now, one of the biggest themes of this conversation is communication is absolutely imperative to having a successful project. And that's all BIM is about, communicating information. So when it comes to communicating with your team, we have so many different ways to communicate now. The BIM execution plan is just one method of sort of stating how you're going to communicate. And how are we going to, again, share information back and forth? But I feel like with the numerous different ways that we have to communicate with our team, we've actually kind of lost a sense of communication because when your only communication is really like actual data sharing, like when you're just, sharing the model only, but you're not actually talking to each other, you can run into some different issues with that.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things that's one of the things that's important to understand, since we're on the subject of obviously etiquette, I think Marie, that's a really good point to bring up. And I think in just sort of the development of the way of software over the last 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case is, we live in such a digital world that I think it's important to remember that there are different methods of communication, whether it's email or sometimes even just picking up the phone. All too often, I think we get caught up in, everyone has my model, everyone has my information, we're sharing content live back and forth, so everyone has an understanding of what's going on. But I think just etiquette-wise, it's important to make sure that you're communicating not just regularly, but clearly. Is everyone understanding what it is you're trying to convey? Is everyone understanding what changes are being made or what adjustments you need to make? And sometimes nuances of what those adjustments are can only be explained, whether over the phone or in a meeting or even a virtual meeting, and whatever the case is, but face to face in some way. So I think that communication part of any project can sometimes get overlooked because we do feel like, we're sharing information all the time. But it's how we communicate sometimes that's more important. So I would say that, again, along the lines of communication, just make sure that everyone has an understanding of what's going on and how we're communicating.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Maria. I just wanted to say one thing to piggyback on what Jim said in that aspect is that if we're talking about design firms, for example, they have project meetings with consultants and people that they're working with on a regular basis anyways. And so there's absolutely no reason in one of these meetings, and used to do this in industry, where we would have a small part of that carved out for a BIM coordination meeting. with our consultants. So whether it's at the front end or the back end, you're having regular project meetings anyways, you can just throw that in, and that's where you can have your personal in-person or verbal communication. So I just wanted to throw that in, that the meetings are scheduled already, utilize them.
Yeah, and BIM execution meetings are fun. I love them. Of course, that's why I'm in this job, so. Esmail, do you have anything you want to add on communication?
Yeah, like, very, very similar to what Jim mentioned and Tom, nowadays with projects being very, very complicated or complex projects, there's a lot of information that's flying around, from PMs to, production staff to designers to clients. I feel that, maybe in the next, I don't want to put years to this number of years, but I think in the next little while, there's going to be a critical change in the AC industry, where you're going to see information management, or possibly an information manager that is responsible to make sure that the right information is getting to the right individual on the team to be able to benefit the project in their way or not. Speaking of the last couple of years in the industry, especially with BIM and everybody adopting BIM and the BIM processes, there's a lot of information that's flying around, and that information's, I want to say, a huge percentage of the time is not hitting the right person that needs to be aware of that information.
Yeah, definitely. So part of the important communication, I've already touched on it a little bit, is talking about model versioning. Again, at the beginning of a project, it's very important to make sure that you specify which model version it is that you're using. But also, you have to understand that every project is a team project. There's no project that's ever completed by like one single person. So there might be reasons later on for an upgrade to be made that is going to benefit a certain party much more than it's going to benefit another party. So for instance, I remember, I think it was 2016 or 2017, there were a lot of changes made to the MEP Revit. And so we ended up upgrading almost all of our projects, the architecture firm I was working at, to the newer version, because MEP really wanted to be able to utilize those new tools. We didn't have our templates ready or anything like that for the new version, but it was worth it for the whole team, because it made one team member be able to work better. So does anyone else have any comments on model versioning?
No, I think that, we could talk about model versioning for the next 3 hours, but I think it's just important, again, since we're talking about communication, just make sure that everyone is communicating and understanding. And that's, again, tying back to the BIM execution plan. Everyone know what it is you're doing, working on it. Sometimes it's not just the specific release version you're talking about, but the actual build of software that's important, for a project and a project team. You want to make sure everyone's on the same build of the release as well. So just communication, that ties in with the BIM execution plan, and just versioning is just an important topic for everyone to understand and be.
Versioning is not the big deal that it once was. I mean, it used to be a lot because of finances and hey, we're going to live on this version forever because we don't want to make the investment into the next version. But now it's all part of the package. It's part of our subscription package. So if it benefits, as Marie said, one part of the team, there's really no reason. And at some point, you're going to do it anyways. There's never a good time to upgrade, so you just have to jump in and do it.
But there is such a thing as a bad time to not upgrade. You should not do the old version anymore.
And going back to the BIM execution plan, right, where most of the BIM execution plans that I've read or created in my career is, it always mentions that we're always going to be working with the latest Autodesk product, right? So the latest Autodesk Revit, for example. And down the road, when it's time to upgrade, I've had situations where we've had consultants always bring up reasons why they don't want to move to the latest and greatest Revit version for some reason. And it's never that it should be an easy conversation. but it's never that easy making that conversation, especially depending on where you are in the project too, as Tom mentioned. Yeah.
Which is exactly why it needs to be a conversation and not just a thing that is just ultimately decided without talking to anybody about it.
Definitely.
So we're going to move on to one of the biggest industry faux pas that I can think of, which is entering into the models of a discipline other than your own model that you're not responsible for. Who would like to kick this one off?
I'm actually gonna kick that one off. You know, this is very exciting to me because you know, when I think of this topic, I think of the classic C4R. You know, everybody, it's a free for all, high trust environment, and you have the individual that might have double clicked on the wrong model for X reason, and now they have a model open. Again, you know, it's very, very, you know, to me, I think it's that ethical part of making sure that, you know, one, you're not opening other disciplines models, period. If you open it by accident, you know, it's going back to that same point of communication. Just send an email out to the other disciplines BIM manager, letting them know that you've opened the model by accident. And the other part of that is having all those models there, which kind of goes back to this old architect that I worked with, back many years ago, where, you know, when we had to shift lighting layouts around back in AutoCAD, he used to ask me to open the AutoCAD file that we got from the electrical engineer and move some lights around, and then we'll deal with it later, right? So no, there's some liability there, and you know, this could be huge, especially in the Canadian, you know, within our Canadian marketplace or industry. This is, you know, there's a huge risk in that for sure.
Yeah, and I think, Yasmina, what you bring up is certainly an environment where everyone would have access to the live models, you know, of all disciplines, and I agree completely. You never want to get into something that's not yours. Even within your company, sometimes you might have an architectural firm, for example, that has architecture and a group that would be an interiors group, and you might have two separate models, or MEP. You might have three separate discipline or four separate discipline models for that. Even within your own firm, you want to just, you know, stay out of someone else's kitchen, so to speak, because there can be issues there. I think, though, when you're working on projects where we don't have access to live models, the same rules still apply in some ways. You know, if you're, again, maybe an architect and you're receiving, as an architect, you're receiving an MEP model or a structural model, and you realize that I need to open that to you know, disconnect it, you know, and make it so that I can work in here, or I need to add some parameters so that it works with my, you know, sheet list and whatever the case is, or I need to do some things in here, adjust some systems colors in the MEP model so that those links don't come through as you know, colored, or again, whatever it is you're going to be doing in there. Sometimes you have to do those things, but don't go in there and think, oh, well, I need to shift this VAV box by about 6 inches so that it will fit over here, and now all of a sudden all my problems go away, and then never tell the engineer. And the next time you get it, you know, just every time you're shifting this, well, that's, you know, don't do that. Or a column grid, you know, for a structural engineer. Don't open other disciplines models, even though you've received them and you're linking them into yours, and make adjustments. You know, again, communicate. Hey, well, guys, we need to adjust this. Can we move this, or, you know, do whatever you need to do?
Well, it's really a question of liability, right? I mean, what discipline owns what? So who's responsible for that discipline? I mean, Jim came up with a couple of great examples, so did Esmel. I mean, when you're dealing with the structural model, and I come from the architectural side again, you know, it's always been the argument, who owns the column grid? Typically, it would really be the structural engineer who owns that column grid. They're going to be the ones who are ultimately responsible for how that, you know, gets put together. So it goes back to liability. It goes back to communication. Like SML, when I was in architecture, there is a timing issue that's involved here, though, too, that we're laying out the reflected ceiling, how we think it should be in this space for the use. The electrical consultant finally gets me his models and he puts them together. So usually I will try to make mine match the electrical. I mean, there's a communication that goes back and forth. So I may want to have some of that data live. We can still work with the coordination aspects of this and doing copy monitoring of certain aspects so we can keep communication digitally that way. But no, there's very little reason why we should ever really have to get into another discipline's model. Jim mentioned a couple examples, and I can say right now that the main reason when I was in industry that I ever got into another model from our contractors or consultants was for sheet title indexing. That was really the only reason for our organization. We as a firm did not want to be changing their data. Now, what's great about linking these models, whether it's doing it live or via Dropbox or something like that, and we're exchanging information, is that we can see right away, if something's not right, and then that goes back around to that communication aspect of this. So, the etiquette aspect of this and ethics is not just taking it in your own hands and saying I'll fix it. It's letting our team know. So I think we're all pretty much on the same page that you better have a really good reason for monkeying around in somebody else's model.
And if you're getting in someone else's model, you had better be telling them that you're doing it. You should ask them first. You should let them know that you're doing it, because if you keep making a change, they might not notice that change is made. They might not pick it up on their drawings, which is another thing. Like, if their drawings have a seal on it and you change something and don't tell them, you're making a change to a sealed drawing and you're not telling anybody about it.
Right.
But ultimately, what it comes down to is if you've got something that you need them to do, whether it be a parameter for your sheet index or a color scheme difference or whatever it may be, put it in your BIM execution plan so that they know, and then you don't have to do that work. Save everyone a little bit of time.
Yep.
SML mentioned earlier that the current environment for BIM and Revit projects is a very, very high trust environment. I really like that term because it is, like, and I think that's great because, we're all working together to create something, a building, which is awesome. And you should trust your team. But, it's important for us to keep in mind that this is a high trust environment. So kind of like the golden rule, like treat others as you would want to be treated. And so one of the things that I find is important to, at least for us to talk about here, is not stealing content from other discipline models. It's too easy, but if there's something in someone's model that you need or that you want because it's like a really cool family or whatever, ask them if you can have it before you just take it. Like, don't just take it without permission, because that's stealing.
Yeah. We all live in this world of Revit, and everyone understands. We get the question all the time of how can I lock down the model? How can I make it so people can't take things out of the model or not change things or whatever? And the true answer at the end of the day is that you can't. I mean, once you give someone your Revit project and that Revit model, you're giving them the content and everything that's in there, and you can't lock things down. There's no way to go in and now there's some tricks and some things we can do to make it seem like it's locked down or whatever, but really at the end of the day, it's open source in a lot of ways. So I agree with that completely. And I think most everyone has probably gotten into their hand caught in the cookie jar, if you will, sometimes of, oh man, that's really cool, I can use that family, or I'm gonna borrow this even for my own projects or whatever it is, or download something off the internet and just make a bunch of changes to it, manufacture content or whatever the case is. I guess I would say to be aware of what it is you're doing. If you're going to take content and you're going to make it your own and you're going to adjust it, I don't know, read maybe a copyright description that someone might have on something and follow the rules of that. Hey, look, they don't want me changing this or whatever the case is. But yeah, just don't steal things out of people's models and just build and develop your own library. You know, and there's even a difference between doing that and maybe use it as a learning experience. Go in and open it up and dissect it and figure out what do they do. Oh, cool! I didn't know that you could use that formula inside of a family or whatever the case is, and get ideas of it, learn from it, and maybe build content yourself that's similar to that. Maybe is more what you need. But I agree, Maureen. This is obviously a very important topic. Just in general, I mean, just don't just go in and you know, steal everything you can and take everything you need just because it's really great in someone else's model.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. I mean, that's for sure, because, you know, out in the web in general, you know, there's all kinds of resources. It's especially talking about Revit families, for example. I mean, you know, there are so many different websites you can go to, and people are sharing stuff, and you can download, you know, these things and use them. And you know, if they're putting them up there, you know, that's one thing. And you go to manufacturer sites and you download it, and that's all good. So you start to get the idea that anything that's in the model is sort of fair game, right? Because we're used to, you know, just going out and grabbing what we need. And I'm not sure that you know, I think there's an old thought in the cooking industry, for example, is that, you know, if you change the recipe by a little bit, you know, you just change this ingredient to that ingredient, well, then it's no longer stealing their recipe. It's your recipe because you've changed it. I'm not so sure that completely works in, you know, the Revit world with, okay, I'm gonna take this guy's casework and I'm going to change it's a piece of casework with drawers, and you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to change out the handles, and now it's mine because it doesn't look like their handles, so now it's my handles. So this is my piece of content. It's a very fine line between utilizing somebody else's hard work and passing it off as your own. It's important to give credit where credit is due, and we've worked with a lot of customers who build and sell content for the express purpose of you know, wanting to use their products. Jim and I personally have worked with some companies that do ORs, for example, and build content specifically for operating rooms and whatnot, but they don't want to just give their content away. Or they don't want some other place to take it, make a few changes, and say, "Oh yeah, come get it from us." You know, it's their product, it's their property.
And on that same note, like, you shouldn't be publishing or giving away somebody else's content. If it's from a manufacturer and they gave it to you specifically for your project, there's a reason why that's not published on their site for everyone to have. A lot of these models have so much information into them that if it got into the hands of a competitor, it could be harmful to their business, and that's wrong for you to be publishing something online for their competitors to get a hold of.
Yeah, and this goes back, and I don't want to jump topics here, Marie, because I think you're going to get to that. But you know, we talked about a BIM execution plan, but this can also be covered in our contracts. You know, when we're writing up the contracts, you know, for the projects themselves. I mean, we have standard, you know, on the architectural side, we have standard AIA contracts that we're going to do, and I haven't looked through them in a while, so I couldn't tell you if a section for this has been added, but we may want to have that spelled out, that anything that we get from a particular manufacturer is not, you know, common use, and we can't use that in other projects.
Yeah,
or shouldn't.
Definitely. So unfortunately, one of the side effects of this being a high trust environment and people making a habit out of stealing things from other people's models, you end up getting certain companies are very withholding with their models. They don't want people to be able to access them or have them in such a high trust environment as we're talking about here, because they're worried about the same thing happening. But you know, withholding models has its own negative impacts on the project.
Yeah, and I agreed. I think on the flip side of, don't just go in and just take everything out of other people's models, especially for your project team. Remember, you're on the same team. You're working on a project. Don't feel like I'm going to withhold information, or I'm not going to use this, or I'm going to, strip stuff out or make this less of a project because I'm afraid to give out this content. I don't want other people to take this content. So just, again, it's balanced. Just be careful and don't feel like oh, I can't deliver this and whatnot because someone's going to steal it. So I agree.
Totally, Jim. As I mentioned, or probably, mentioned to a lot of my clients, BIM is all about, sharing information and collaborating with each other to, at the end of the day, keeping the project in mind and providing the best product, coordinated product to site. Withholding models due to, thinking about, their content getting stolen or concepts getting, taken away or used with other firms. It's just, in my opinion, I think that's, it's not, if it's communicated well, as Tom mentioned, and it's and a lot of, and everybody's playing by the rules, sharing the models are, not withholding information from other project parties is just going to help make the project easier and make sure that avoiding issues on site. It's as simple as that, really.
And I think you're going to find that most people are pretty good about this. There's always, there's always a few outliers, from occasion, and Jim mentioned it. We all on occasion have stuck our hand in the cookie jar and use something that maybe we didn't get express permission to use at one time or another. But the idea is that that's not a habit.
Yeah, definitely. And it's because you're working in these high collaborative environments where if you do something wrong, you can believe that someone's going to know about it and don't need to get caught doing something wrong when you can just communicate with each other and potentially get everything you want out of that model or from the other team and not have any problems at all.
It's important to remember and understand that this, not just Revit, not BIM, not AutoCAD, but going back to, the dawn of architecture and design, if you will, this is all intellectual property. And just, I would say, just as a rule of thumb, just remember in general, kind of the rules behind intellectual property. And if you have a question about something, you're sure, should I do this? Should I not do this? Stop and think to yourself, man, if I developed this, or if I wrote this book, or I did whatever, how would I want others to treat it? So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're called contract documents for a reason.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean,
Definitely.
ultimately, go ahead. Were you saying something, Esmail?
No, I was just agreeing with Tom and Jim on that, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, BIM is all about sharing information. So the more informed that everyone on your project is, the more successful your project is going to be. So it's important to feel comfortable to share that information and for the entire project team to be, kind of conducive to that mindset of like, this is high trust. We're all going to be, collaborating and sharing. If everyone's on the same page, then there's nothing to worry about. Well, we are just about out of time. So does anyone have any closing remarks?
One of the things that I want to mention is for a virtual event, virtual roundtable, I think it went really well. Yeah, but that's,
I agree.
That's about it.
I agree. I think in closing, I would just say again, to me, the number one thing of wrapping up etiquette, ethics, but certainly etiquette is just communication. Communicate on any level you can and in any way you can to make sure that things are clearly defined and understood, and everyone's kind of on the same page and knows what's going on.
Yeah, and writing those things down in a BIM execution plan just makes it that much clearer.
Yeah.
From the get-go. And
Definitely.
we can look at that execution plan as, I'm going to say living and breathing document that as we're in communications, it can be amended and changed and as we go through, but we need to have that guideline to go through our project.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about ethics and etiquette here, and etiquette always basically comes down to manners. So pretty much just don't be a jerk on your projects and work collaboratively and communicate, and you're much more likely to have a truly successful project and great relationships with the rest of your team come the end of this. So,
yeah, Marie, I think that was the absolute best way to sum it up. Don't be a jerk.
don't be a
I
jerk.
like that.
Easy to remember. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and I hope that you guys enjoy the rest of your Elevate experience.